Welcome and good evening, everybody. Tonight's going to be kind of an enjoyable night. I'm really excited about this presentation, and for all of those folks that are from out of town, welcome to our fine city. This is an honor as the mayor to be able to present this tonight and talk just for a few minutes. And I will have one story that I'd like to say before I get going here too much, and that was I was telling a lady out here earlier this evening in the hallway. As a kid, I grew up in eastern Oregon, and we had a 20-acre small farm. And my dad was a big horse guy. And we always had 4 or 5 horses, and there was 4 of us boys. And we had to groom these horses, take care of them, curry them, and do all the different things with them, ride them, of course. And one of the fun things for my dad was in the spring of the year, and some of these horses were thoroughbreds. And what he used to love to do is throw you up on top the back of a horse, bareback, and slap the horse right on the butt, and away we'd go. And boom, 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 I would fall on the ground, and he thought that was great sport. Yeah. Anyway, the point, there's a kind of an interesting thing about it. Out of us 4 boys, I was the worst cowboy ever. So I just want to share that with everybody here. I did have 2 brothers that were excellent riders, but I was not. But I still like horses. That's not a problem for me. But I don't think they like me very well. So with that, we'll go on. Thank you for joining us here in the 3rd Street Gallery this evening to celebrate the Appaloosa Horse Club. I remember coming here in 1977. It was one of the first things that I got a chance to see not too long after I got here, and I really didn't know much about the Appaloosa Horse, so I was excited over the years and the longevity and the history that we have here in Moscow with that. Moscow is extremely lucky to be the home of the International Horse Breed Registry, a unique feature for our community that brings us attention from around the world. The museum is a huge education resource for our community, not only for our residents, but for visitors who travel to Moscow as well. We have a few special guests here this evening. Most importantly, Miss Iola Hatley is with us this evening, who is instrumental. Yes, give her a... Iola was instrumental in starting the museum, and she's on the museum board. She and her husband, George, brought the club to Moscow, Idaho. She has worked, I don't know how many years, as a secretary for a long time at the club. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I've got something for you that I'd like to bring to you. This is a very gracious lady. Okay, well, I have to do that. Let's put that on your last.
Oh, that's great. That's beautiful. Thank you.
In addition, there's some other folks I'd like to thank. Lauren McCleary from the Appaloosa Horse Club, who volunteers as a Moscow Arts Commission as part of her work as well. So thank you very much in coordinating this exhibit. Also, a big thank you to Crystal White for assisting in delivering all these wonderful pieces at the 3rd Street Gallery, and to Kathleen Burns, she's here somewhere. Yep. DJ Scarlin, and members of the Art Commission for the work as well that they do here. And now I'd like to introduce Mr. Steve Taylor, the CEO of Appaloosa Horse Club. For the past 12 years, Steve is involved in the leadership roles with the Idaho Council, the American Horse Council, the National Pedigree Livestock Council, and the Color Breeds Council. Thank you for that, Steve, and welcome. Let's welcome Steve here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm looking forward to the presentation.
First things first, put on my reading glasses. I'm not going to read to you, though, I promise. But let me ask you a question. How intimidated would you be talking about the history of the Appaloosa Horse Club with Iola Hatley in the room? It's a little scary. So, Iola, I want you to promise me something. When I say something incorrect or fake news, just tell me later, okay? I know you will. Well, you know, I will mention, I told the board today too, I'm an Illinois native, but I've always been in love with mountains. I always thought I was in love with horses, but I had two really bad ones before I got a good one, which made it kind of hard. But my introduction to Appaloosa horses was actually 1972. That makes me really old. But the thing that I really appreciate is the fact that those people that befriended me back then are still among my friends, the ones who are left, obviously. And so I think one of the things we really try to talk about as a breed association is the fact that it is a family-friendly, connect with your friends kind of a place. Always has been, and still is. But we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the club, but first we're going to talk about the horses themselves. And I borrowed a little trick that I keep seeing every once in a while in a few newspapers around the country. 5 things you need to know today, 10 things you need to know today. We're going to stick with 10 because I didn't want to wear you out. But the first basic fact is these spotted horses have been around for thousands of years. Some people say 8 to 10, pick your number, but it's thousands of years. The painting on the left, which is also up in the museum, is a cave painting in central France somewhere. But there are cave paintings with spotted horses on them in every continent, all over the world. And they have become, in different cultures, various forms of idol worship, various forms of wealth, various symbols of wealth. And it just shows you that your genetics have been around for a long, long time. Dr. Balone? Yes. One of the really interesting things that happened to me a few years ago, and Mike was around, when Connor Woodman came to town filming his documentary called True Appaloosa. And he got hooked up with somebody off in Uzbekistan with a herd of these spotted horses running through the valleys and the mountains, and was just really curious about how that all got started. But the short version of the story is the DNA samples from those horses match today's spotted horses pretty well, and we're just convinced that the LP gene that Dr. Balone figured out was probably back in those horses as well. And then, of course, we talk a lot in the museum about the connection between the Appaloosa breed and the Nez Perce tribe. So we have 2 different theories. One is the Spanish brought the horses to America or to the continent, and they worked their way up, and we know that happened. The true Appaloosa theory is that they came across the land bridge back when Alaska and Russia were stuck together, and I believe that one too. So I think we've got horses coming in all directions. The point is, as we got into the 1700s, 1760s, and 70s, the tribes up in this part of the world acquired more horses, either by trade or by thievery or by accident, however it happened. But a lot of them ended up in here, the Nez Perce, of course, the Shoshone, Walla Walla, Yakima, Crow, and Blackfeet, all in the early 1700s. The story that I really enjoyed the most reading some research for this program was the fact that there was a guy standing up on one of the taller Palouse hills and saying he was pretty sure he could see 4,000 horses grazing on the grass. And that grass at that time, of course, hadn't been plowed. It was stirrup tall, as they say. And they really did have a reason for calling this part of the world Horse Heaven Hills, which is a good name for a winery. Somebody should try that sometime. And, of course, after the War of 1877, which was kind of the end of that particular era of conflict, a lot of farmers and ranchers ended up with those horses. Many of them are spotted variety, and from there they became very useful critters. And we'll talk about some of the people that got together and said, hey, maybe we need to do something about this. So we're going to talk about some of our founding fathers. And this is Dr. Francis Haynes, who was a Montana native but went to California to get a degree in Northwest history with a special emphasis on the Nez Perce tribe. So he was a good guy to be familiar with what had gone on and what might go on. But the thing that really impresses me the most about these guys, they got together and said, hey, let's form a breed association right in the middle of the Depression. That takes some tough-minded folks. As time went on, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he's the one who wrote the original article in Western Horseman, and that's what created the interest among a lot of other folks who had those horses and weren't sure what they had or what to do with them. That was in 1937. Within a year, Dr. Haynes and a fellow by the name of Claude Thompson. What was that? I missed it. Pardon?
Let him finish his sentence.
The article was in 37. I read that somewhere.
I just corrected it a little.
I understand. The club was founded in 38, but it took them a while to get things put together. So here we go.
We have computers.
But Claude Thompson was another one of those who was really one of the spearhead fellows who helped organize the club, became the first president, and was president for at least 4 years, as I recall.
And he helped us quite a bit to get started because we were having the Appaloosa Horse Club in our home.
Right, and I know that he probably financed things for the first few years himself.
Well, there was no money, period.
But I did find a quote about him that, if it's not true, you can tell me, but I really thought it was pretty impressive. During his lifetime, there is no evidence Claude Thompson made any effort to impose his will on others. He had strong convictions about Appaloosa breeding and what it should be. However, he was not devious, nor did he lend his name to attempts to formulate club policy. Never one to be involved in the politics of the organization, his efforts were always directed towards starting the colorful spotted horse of history on the long road from obscurity to a place of genuine prominence in the equine world. That's a pretty good epitaph, if you ask me. So that makes him one of my heroes as well. As I said, he was the first president. He's now in the Hall of Fame. And the thing that you need to know when you come to the museum, the original portion of the building is considered the Haynes-Thompson wing or room of the building. And there's a good reason why those two particular founders were given that particular recognition. However, although not specifically a first-day founder, most of us consider George a founding father of some variety because he put in so much of the early work. He was appointed secretary-treasurer in September of 1947. He became assistant secretary. He was a director. He was a secretary. He was the executive secretary for at least 30 years, I think maybe 31 technically. He's also in the Hall of Fame, and I have to mention his wife Iola is also in the Hall of Fame. But the list of things that George was the first at is really one of the impressive things to know about him. He published the first stud book. He and Dr. Haynes worked on it. We happen to have them. We still have a few of these. And I believe it had, let's see, I thought I had it. 338 horses were listed in here, 180 different owners. Iola did all the typing, as I have heard. So that's pretty impressive. He became the first editor of the Appaloosa News, as it was called. And luckily, yes, I have a few of those for you to look at. Appaloosa News started out as kind of a single sheet thing like this with information from folks all over the country. Then, by golly, a few months later, it became a 4-pager. And then I'm really proud to say, and I believe I've got the number right, this week we're in production for our 781st issue in a row. And I will mention later, but this is an award-winning magazine these days, and we're very proud of the folks who do that. George also worked to develop the Chief Joseph Trail Ride. Back in 1965, when they first started, there were probably 40 riders, I think. and he grew that into its own institution. It's one of those things that we're probably the most proud of in terms of something unique in the equine world, retracing the trail of the Nez Perce from all the way from Joseph, Oregon, across the Snake, up to Whitebird, over the Bitterroot, through Yellowstone, on up to almost the Canadian border with Montana. It's a terrific story. It's a humbling story. You think about 12 or 1,300 miles with hundreds of men, women, children, horses, dogs, and the fact that they spent 5 months escaping is just really incredible. And the fact that we get to retrace that trail with folks who are actually from the tribe is one of those things that just knocks me over every year. The fact that, well, I still remember a few years ago, they thanked us for sharing the trail with them. I said, no, thank you for sharing with us. It's been really cool. George was also the manager for the first National Appaloosa Show. We have, oh, that's the wrong one, sorry. There it is, the first Appaloosa Show, Lewiston, Idaho, 1948. The part that staggers me is the fact that, let me look to make sure I'm right, there were 17 classes. Think about that, guys. And a one-day show. Wasn't too many years before they had to go to 2 days. But I tell people today's class list is, what, 230 or something like that. It's just incredible. But the fact that they got together and put on an all-breed or a single-breed show, and it grew so quickly, is a testament, I think, to George and the whole folks who did that. He also was responsible for the first national sale, and he was eventually inducted into our Hall of Fame, as I mentioned, but he was also the thing that a lot of people may not know who are from out of town, but the site where the current building is, the office building, was part of the original Hatley Ranch. And there are plenty of pictures of George and Toby, too, out there on the Hatley Ranch. I wanted to mention another big turning point, which is our item number 3, and that's the year 1948. Think about it, just 10 years later, they organized the club, started the registry, the stud book, had a show a few years later then, 1948. They also had their first membership meeting. Folks really came from quite a ways. And that's when the stud book was published and the board was enlarged a little bit and things really started to roll as far as the organization itself.
So George Hatley got all that done in 1 year?
No. But one thing about it is that the Appaloosa Horse Club paid for its building out of a checking account. We never borrowed money or anything. We, all at once, by advertising, every time George was going to get a raise, he would say, well, we could use that money for advertising. And advertising really did it. Oh, I want all of you to meet my son. Thinking of leaving, I think. Anyway, he's become quite interested in the museum. He understands a lot about art and everything. And so he comes to all the meetings. I think you're vice president, aren't you?
I knew this was going to be a tandem presentation. So item number 4 is one of those things that's, as my grandma used to say, anytime you get people together in a group, you're going to have some problems. And of course, every organization does. They argued back in the 30s and 40s about how to define the type of horse the Appaloosa really was. Guess what? We're still doing that. Is it a breed based on color or is it a breed based on bloodlines? We still have 2 or 3 sides to that discussion. They talked about approved breeds, which means being able to outcross an Appaloosa with another breed, which in our case has always been quarter horse, thoroughbred, and Arabian. which some people argue that dilutes the breed. Other people argue it makes it special and gives you the opportunity to breed for a variety of specialties or disciplines. But that argument probably isn't ever going to be settled either. We've had a few arguments about whether the office should be here in Moscow, Idaho. A lot of interesting reading in the file cabinets of the Appaloosa Horse Club, including newspaper clippings from the Moscow paper about how that made folks feel. It was a pretty testy time, I believe would be safe to say. And we've had lots of discussions periodically about member representations. Does that sound familiar? Whether it's congressional districts or Appaloosa Horse Club territories and zones. Always trying to make sure there's fair representation, some sort of balance, and that's an ongoing situation. And in a lot of the history that I read for this particular message was about all the conflicts that came up because of racing. People couldn't decide if that was a legitimate use of our time and money as a horse club. The racing folks, of course, thought that they were probably the most important group because they put our breed in front of more people than anybody else. And I think that's a fair argument to make. Early days of racing were pretty impressive, and I want to back up and mention, tell me if this is right, George won the feature race at the first national show.
And I gave the ribbon.
And you gave the ribbon.
And it was their anniversary.
Oh, my goodness. There have been really some outstanding racehorses in the history of the Appaloosa breed, and there still are some great ones running today. And in fact, this issue, that's the April issue, has another feature on some of the racing greats, some of the award winners from the past year. And although we used to have races all over the West and a lot of different parts of the country, most of our races now are in Oklahoma and Texas. Still a few in Idaho, not too many in California, but a handful, and probably a few over on the west side. But the fact is, our horses are still competing against the very best of other breeds as well as within our group. The thing that I also am proud of in terms of the Appaloosa Horse Club is the fact that we were the first ones to organize a youth association among the breeds. And in fact, it became a model for many of the other breeds because we had a smart guy by the name of Ed Roberts who did a lot of the organizing. He later became executive secretary for the Paint Horse Association. But the fact is, he had a lot of foresight. Our very first all-youth show was in 1966. Sean, were you there? No, I don't think so. That was in Hutchinson, Kansas. Well, they got crazy. They had 30 classes. But today we have, in the summer, in conjunction with our national show, we have the World Youth Championship Show, which is now currently in Fort Worth, Texas. Then a few years went by and they formed a youth association and had their own youth board of directors. And now there's also an Appaloosa Youth Foundation, which is primarily focused on scholarships for the younger members of the breed. And I think one of the things that we've learned just by hanging around those young people and their horses is that if there's ever a marketing campaign that would work, it would be something that I learned or borrowed from a friend of mine years ago who did some research for the Arabian Association. They had a stack of research that was just crazy, but he said you could have put it on a matchbook cover. Get more little girls on horses. And that's so true, very true today. Oops, there we go. That's the pointer. I don't need that. So the other part of the club that has lasted for so long is that we've mentioned the Chief Joseph Trail Ride, but there have also been a number of other hallmark rides around the country that were organized by other volunteers. And the picture on the right was couple of years ago at least, at our National Championship Endurance Ride out in the middle of nowhere, Oregon. But the thing that I've learned from these folks who don't go to the fancy shows is that their passion for the breed is just as strong as anybody else's, and they will do anything to make sure that the Appaloosa brand is well represented. And these folks happen to have a lot of fun as well. I did want to mention our friend Ann Michelle, who was on the very first Chief Joseph trail ride with her husband Jim, who for years was the official photographer. They were from over in Oregon. And this is year number 53, I believe, for the Chief Joseph ride. I think she's only missed one of them because she broke something, had to stay home. We also have what we call approved regional rides that folks around the country put on, and we have that National Championship Endurance ride, which is 50 miles. And I don't know about you, but I'm not excited about the idea of riding 50 miles on anything but a fast car, but there you go.
50 miles on an Appaloosa is easy.
Well, there you go. That's probably true.
And I would like to add, if I could,
Yes.
as long as we're talking about history, that this is the first breed association to have a distance riding program for its horses.
There you go.
Another one of the first that we can be proud of.
You bet. Thank you. So number 7, I wanted to mention just a couple of highlights about the racing. The thing that is still kind of a sore subject for some people is the fact that from the very first national show up until 1978, the national show involved races as well. And I mentioned George won the first feature race on Toby 2. You guys also bred a horse called Apache Double. He's in the Racing Hall of Fame, held several track records, and earned the Appaloosa Horse Club's very first medallion. So I think that's pretty cool.
That was my horse.
Yes. And for those of you that have received the journal, I hope you've been reading Robert Lapp's series on Appaloosa racing, because his research has been pretty amazing, and I really do enjoy that. Oh, and by the way, there were politics within the circles of racing, too, not just with the folks on the outside. We have to mention the fact that the Appaloosa Horse Club really is an international breed association. Started out just like everything else, moving gradually, moving up into Canada and several places, but I think currently we have affiliate organizations in 24 foreign countries. And as I like to tell people, every year about 30% of the horses we register come from someplace besides the United States. Canada certainly has a big number, but you would be amazed at how horse crazy and all things Western crazy the folks in Europe are. Germany, France, Italy, Czech Republic, Netherlands, Poland, the list goes on and on. And this year, this summer, the Europeans have decided they're going to organize and host the first ever European trail ride to honor Chief Joseph. I think that's pretty cool.
It really is.
And over the years, they've gotten to the point then when we did the redistricting thing and the zoning thing, got a representative who's been on the board now for a couple of decades, I think, from the Netherlands. But it's one of those things that does make us feel pretty special, because we know we've got connections and neighbors everywhere we want to go. We've got a breeder in New Caledonia, so it's everywhere. We want to talk a little bit about our show programs. As I mentioned, the first national show was in 1948, so guess what? We've celebrated our 70th national show. The longest running single breed horse show in the nation. We're very proud of that. Over the years, it's moved around in a lot of places. Obviously, those first years where they had races, it was mostly at state fairgrounds. Then it became a little different look because it was moved around depending on the facility, and when people decided they didn't want to be outdoors in all kinds of weather and a lot of other issues that came along. In 1961, in addition to the national show, they organized something called the playoffs, which every sport seems to have these days. Now it's become known as the World Championship Appaloosa Horse Show, held in the fall, now in Fort Worth. But it's a show where you have to earn qualifying points in order to participate in that show. And this is my favorite little piece of trivia. at the very first playoffs in 1961 in Sedalia, Missouri, there was a horse who won the half-mile race, competed in a few other classes, including halter. No, he wasn't in halter. Became referred to as the Grand Champion Performance Horse. His name was General Custer. Oh, come on, that was funny. But certainly the breed gained attention when regional clubs started to be formed around the country and started to put on shows, and that really did make things grow a lot. We have a former board member who was always proud to point out to us, and now a current board member who's proud to point out to us, that Calazona was the first regional club to be formed. Do you remember that, 1953? Mary Ann?
Yeah, I wasn't born yet.
Oh, okay.
Just saying.
And of course, the whole concept of showing has changed over the years, and obviously we keep adding classes because we've got a separate youth program. Pretty much everybody has a non-pro or an amateur program for those folks to participate, and then a whole open show for people who are either professional or want to be. And these days we're seeing some more trends change, and we talk about this a lot as a board and as a group and as a staff, that there are more and more opportunities, either by necessity or by choice, to have multi-breed events, basically open to whoever wants to come that has a horse, doesn't matter what color or what breed. And some of those have gained in popularity, and I think we're going to see some more shifts as we go down the road. We talked today about a new category of classes called ranch riding. Well, it's not a new category. We're just doing what people did 50 years ago. Get on your horse and ride, and you don't have to buy a fancy suit. You just saddle up and go ride and have what's probably best known as friendly competition. There's a lot of angst, I guess, in the industry because of the fact that, and I mentioned this morning to our group, but in the last 20 years, the breed registries have lost a lot of members. The number of horses that we register has declined. A lot of different reasons for that. Some are economic, some are lifestyle choices and changes. A lot of it has to do with just the fact that if you have a good horse and you can go do something with it and have fun, you may not care whether it has a birth certificate. But researchers want them to have birth certificates, and people who compete in breed events need to have that. And so one of our pushes, I guess, in the coming time frame will be to keep reminding people that in most cases your horse really is more valuable if it has registration papers. So the first thing we do as an association is register horses, document pedigrees. The second thing we do is provide programs and activities so that people can do something with those horses. And the third thing we do is a little more spiritual. It just provides a place for people to come together with other folks who love horses. And it's really that simple. That is what we do. And the thing that makes it all work, if I'd hit the right button, is the fact that people in our industry and in our association are still the ones who make all the difference in the world. We've got a lot of our board members here from around the country, and I appreciate the fact that you're here. We have members, obviously, all over the world, as we mentioned. We have a staff, and several of those are here tonight. Thank you guys very much. But some kind of connection and circle or zigzag among all those folks is really what makes what we think is a special group. And I really want to say that I appreciate the City of Moscow letting us have some attention tonight. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. And before I go, I wanted to mention once again, the Appaloosa Journal is really, truly an award-winning magazine. Just within the last 3 or 4 years, they've done something notable every year to earn some pretty prestigious honors against all types of publications, not just livestock or horses. And then I want to be sure to remind everybody to come visit us at the museum. It's really one of the treasures, I think, of this part of the world, and I know we had some board members who'd never been here before, and they were very impressed and appreciate the fact that so much work went into making that all happen. And we're proud of the fact that we still don't charge, although that's one of our problems economically, obviously. But you're certainly welcome, and we want you to come see us. And my last word to you all is thank you, Moscow. Any more stories, Iola?
Sorry about that.
I don't know what we do without them. Now what do we do?
Does anyone have questions? Kelsey.
Yeah, you spoke a little bit about the number of people registering horses is down, and I will say I own a registered quarter horse. But
Good for you.
not in Appaloosa, I know, but but I have her paperwork. But I guess I wonder, is that really indicative of the trend? I haven't followed it. Is horse ownership across America down?
Yeah.
And I mean, is there, like, by what percentage? I mean, I truly don't know the.
Well, I'll just give you a raw number, which boggles my mind, but in those 20 years that I talked about, the collective group of breed registries, quarter horse, Appaloosa, Paint, Arabian, Buckskin, Pinto, all of those, their numbers have gone down by 240,000 members. But again, you know, we talk about this a lot at places like the American Horse Council. The whole culture has changed. I mean, I see a lot of folks in here in my age group, you know, we all grew up with cowboy and horse heroes. There aren't those available to people anymore. And of course, we don't even have to talk about the number of competing distractions that there are for young people today. I mean, that's obviously a problem. Besides that, their attention span is too short. They go out riding all day. But all kinds of issues like that, plus, we got to be honest, because of the changes in our culture and our landscape, and you know, you can blame taxes, land values, whatever you want, everything's expensive. And we mentioned this, I guess, this morning too, but unfortunately, we're still in a state where there are the haves and the have-nots. And if you're a have-not, a horse in your backyard is not high on your list. But we don't want horses to just be the sport of kings, like the thoroughbred folks have always liked. We'd love for average people, whatever that is, to be able to afford and enjoy a horse. But that's one of the big challenges. So what we've all, you know, the industry is talking about different ways to make it easier to have shared ownership or rent a horse or whatever. So one of the best stories I heard was a breeder out east who got 20 of his coffee buddies together and said, each of you give me $1,000 and you can own a 30th of a brood mare. And then he had parties for them and took them to the races and brought them out to the farm to meet their horse and had picnics and probably beer parties or whatever else. Then when the foal was born, they all got to watch it on the webcam thing. And then they got to watch it develop as a yearling. And then when they sold it as a yearling, they got to decide whether they wanted to re-up or take the money and run. At least half of them re-upped because they just had fun. They didn't go riding, but they had a connection with the horse. And I think that's a great story.
Well, you know, George started, or the Hatley family started Hatley Horse Council, and on the ranch up at Deary, we fixed it so that children could ride. A lot of children owned horses but didn't have a ranch. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff going on like that, but in the beginning, when I first came to this country, they had a parade or something to do with horses every week. George would convince me that I could get on this horse and it wouldn't throw me. But it's different. It really and truly is different now. So
I will say, I mean, if there are a lot of out-of-towners here, our local 4-H does not do Horse Project.
No.
And I know I grew up with Horse Project where I was, and so that was a big incentive to have a horse, is that we could show, we had a show built into our schedule. And here there is no,
Well, maybe you should do something about that.
I'm not qualified for that, but I would be an advocate for it.
All you have to do is raise your hand.
That is an option.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have a question. Like, it just seems like the Palouse is ripe for a race. We have a lot of property that adjoins property that adjoins property, but we're in a really special area of the world that they don't fence. And it just seems like after harvest would be a really great time to have a race.
You should come to our meeting.
And if it's like, I just think we live in a really wonderful area with lots of land.
For sure.
And we have a great museum, and I just think we could host our own race.
Trying to think whether it
And
was
it would
St.
be
Joe,
a
Missouri, or
cross-country
someplace else along the Pony Express route, but they had like a Pony Express relay race.
Yeah,
That was pretty fun.
yeah.
We
But
just
we're
did that
kind
last
of,
time.
when you go farther east, people fence their land, and they just.
Yeah, we hear, of course, there are some really scary statistics about the number of acres of land that are lost every day.
Right.
It's just huge. It would just knock you over, I think. So, yeah, we are lucky.
We're really lucky. That's just an observation. And I'm not a horse person.
But you could be.
I'm going to tell a story. My niece was the queen of the roundup, and she wanted me to get on her horse, and it was 17 hands tall, which I don't understand.
That's tall.
And I said, I don't think I can get on that. And she said, well, climb up on my Honda car. So I got on a horse.
Are there pictures of that?
I got a short horse.
Got pictures of that?
Yeah. Pretty scary.
Okay, thanks, everybody.